The world of Warcraft has designed itself into a corner. I thought of all sorts of witty analogies to sound like a smartass. I mean, that's usually how it goes, right? You give them something newsworthy to go viral, and then that drives the narrative. But I ain't good at that stuff. So, yeah, that's a great intro, right? Blizzard has designed World of Warcraft into a corner with some of the major decisions made over the past few expansions. Some things they can worm their way out of, like, oh, they prune too much. Okay, let's unprune. Or, hey, there's too much RNG. Alright, well, they're still working on that. But there are bigger moves the WoW team has made that have affected the course of WoW in big ways. Expansion affecting ways. Maybe fundamental ways that are hard, perhaps impossible to see a way out of. One example, the so-called expansion features like the leveling perks from Warlords. You remember those? Yeah, probably not. Those have since turned into talents, or glyphs, or legendaries, or Azeroth traits, or became baseline, or they just went away. The Garrison, on the other hand, much more memorable. The Garrison was a gold factory that unleashed one of the two biggest gold inflation periods in WoW's history, the other being the Legion mission table in the follow-up expansion. The effects of that are still being felt today, even after many black market auction house transactions and Brutosaur purchases later. The takeaway from that, though, is that after Warlords and after Legion, the incredible gold generating power went from 100 to 0, literally overnight. Legion brought us a wealth of expansion features, spec-defining artifact weapons, powerful legendary gear that never needed replacing, and even more legendary complaints over how to get them, and of course more of that delicious gold generation. All of that too was stripped away as the Battle for Azeroth began. Those of us who hopped in early in that expansion know the feeling, and those who didn't, well, the fandom made sure to drill that into your head. Let's try to get back on topic though, this corner that Blizzard backed itself into. Shadowlands is going to redefine the way WoW leveling is played, and it's so much more than something percent faster leveling speed. It's also more prevalent than the speculation that I talked about earlier that is all but confirmed. The World of Warcraft is becoming a FOMO MMO. If you think that it has already, well, it's going FOMO in a way unlike ever before. But oh Soul, you silly horde, you've already described that when talking about the leveling perks and garrison stuff and artifacts, Azeroth, legendaries, essences. Well, WoW expansions are an experience that, many would argue, are best had when they are present. So you can share those one-time moments with others. The wonder, the drama, the salt, the meme creation, the whatever this dude's laughing about. When Blizzard launches Shadowlands in however many months, they're going to compartmentalize all of their previous expansions into a trash can? A recycle bin? A bucket. Here we go. Let's go with a bucket. All expansions before Shadowlands will go into this level 10 to level 50 bucket that, for all the good that it offers, it neuters the overall feeling of WoW as a complete game. And on a side note, if you don't know what I'm talking about with this whole level squish thing, check out the link in the corner here, I believe, where I talk about it a lot more. Leveling new characters after Shadowlands means that we can optionally, aka probably, skip all but the one expansion that we feel like leveling through and go straight to whatever's current. This isn't necessarily bad at all, because well, we ought to rightfully consider the fact that leveling through 15 years worth of expansions is bound to break somewhere. It clearly has. And not everyone would be fond of being forced to complete like a main story questline on top of leveling like Final Fantasy XIV does. And here's where we cue all of the Final Fantasy and World of Warcraft comparison comments. This is gonna be great. Think of World of Warcraft Legion. Not as it was, but how it is now, in 2020, but before Shadowlands. It's just a quick stop to breeze by on the way to max level. All that once was is just a memory for some, and it's even less for those who have never played through Legion when it was current. And that's sort of tragic, isn't it? After Shadowlands, the joy of choosing Legion as your expansion of choice to leveling will be limited to the things that you get while leveling from 10 to 50. It's not going to be necessarily the opening of relic slots or discovering the powers of your artifact, and well, you're not really going to have a legendary long enough at all to know how powerful that it made you feel. It's just leveling. It's pretty leveling, ooh, but it's just leveling. I'd speculate that Battle for Azeroth and maybe even Shadowlands will be treated the same way. This is the corner that Blizzard has created, a kind of purgatory for its older expansions, and as far as we can see, it's a foundation to continue a cycle of expansion features that come and go, despite all of our input and feedback. Because some people are apparently fine with this. The sobering reality is that a lot of players are silently approving this model by just playing and feeling satisfied enough to stick around. Even if the data agrees with this, I see this as complacency and a rib against WoW's game director who originally sought to modernize WoW for the long term. Gosh, I'm being like so negative, ew. So let's shift gears now and try to see just how to turn this around with some game design fanfiction. Let's not kid ourselves though. This right here is the immediate future of WoW. Dread it, run from it, same joke, different video. But does this have to be the whole story? Is there more that we can add to this model without running into the problems that said model is trying to solve? Yeah, maybe. I'm going to talk about two design approaches, and the first is gameplay focused and delivers on the promise of the following. It doesn't cause bloat that requires retuning, aka pruning and unpruning. It fulfills a sense of character progression, whether it's tangible or imagined. It introduces gameplay depth that can be easily understood, but hard to master. And of course, it fits into this whole new fangled model here. Are you excited as I am? Of course you're not, because I didn't really say much of anything yet. I'm not going to get into really detailed specifics that would distract your reactions, and instead try to be brief and let you, the listener, dream up concepts of your own. And by the way, nothing that I'm suggesting here is evolutionary, like at all. In fact, for those of you who've watched my content for some time, you're going to hear a broken record. The difference is that I'm adding these design modifications to a brand new leveling system that will be implemented in the coming months. That ship has sailed. This is coming. But what I seek to add is horizontal progression to character design. WoW doesn't have much of, if any, great examples of horizontal progression, so I'll first describe what we're used to: vertical progression. Leveling up gets us more stats. Equipping higher item level gear from tougher stuff, for the most part, increases our throughput. Every few levels, we unlock another row on the talent bar. And back in the days of talent trees, the trees, they just grew deeper. As for more recently, when we get our neck level to a certain threshold, another Azerite power choice unlocks. All of that is a form of vertical progression. Also notice though, that all of this has had to be reined in at some point through squishes and scaling because bloat is real. And don't be fooled by things like these talent rows here. I mean, sure, we get to choose the thing that Icy Veins tells us to choose, but this is just an additional choice that is given to us during leveling. It's something added on top. It's vertical. In a nutshell, the current model of using expansion features is to give and then take away to avoid the bloat. Okay, that makes sense in a certain context, but literally they're giving and then taking away. It tells us as players that we should have been there for it, and the feeling of that loss just sucks. What I want to see in the future of WoW is, like I said, horizontal progression, adding more options while keeping the number of decisions that you make the same. This is less of an example and more like a model to help you understand what I'm talking about, but let's use the current talent row system as a visual. Imagine that in your early leveling experience, your talent bar grows as it usually does, in a downward and vertical fashion. But later, as expansions roll out, instead of more rows, you get more columns. Each column represents memorable, iconic, and thematic bits from each expansion feature when it was current, and is created at the start of the following expansion. The Legion column can represent a number of, popular legendaries, artifact traits, or abilities. BFA columns can have class-specific Azerite traits or essences. By growing horizontally, the depth of talent builds will grow over time, but the number of decisions that you make, the number of rows, remains the same. I'm going to remind you again that this isn't necessarily the idea. This is just, one example of how to take cool things from each expansion and add it to our character's personality without the unnecessary bloat. Now I get it. The gears are turning in your head.
Oh my god, the details, the balance, the work put in.
The cynical side of you, it just wants to say, haha, Blizzard, they won't be able to balance that. But don't get distracted by the details. It's just about the message. Horizontal progression can be in WoW's future, and in order to respect the past that we've left behind, it has to be. That is the sort of long-term design that WoW needs to pick up in order to be an MMO that preserves the legacy of its expansions beyond the bucket. But gameplay isn't the only component of an MMO, and adding depth to gameplay isn't the only thing that WoW needs. We all have our different itches to scratch, short and long-term goals that bring us fulfillment, whether it's completing the gear set that lets us pull off that badass rotation, or downing a boss in the fastest time, to downing it at all. To my other point, achievements, or collecting transmog, pets, and mounts that we can show off to others, but maybe most importantly, to ourselves. It's that personal high, this pride in showing off our trophies long after the content is cleared. What WoW needs is an additional Evergreen system that can withstand the test of time. An Evergreen system doesn't pay attention to the stat squish or the level squish. It doesn't care about the brand new class, or if that class sucks ass at a certain fight. Apart from a few tweaks here and there, an Evergreen system grows at its own pace, sometimes with a certain independence against the rest of the game content, but it always grows. Achievements, as I mentioned, are an Evergreen system that adds recognition to your accomplishments. Transmogrification unleashes the creativity in players to define their characters with whatever gear they like, long after the path to obtain said gear has been trivialized. The collection systems, the account-wide systems that govern that, the pets and the mounts and the toys, those systems are forever. Your crit rating at max level, it is not forever. These systems exist for all players, but just as important, you don't need to give one flying fuck about it. Pets, mounts, toys, transmog, they're just things to sell in the auction house, right? Achievements are also something to sell to those without the time or the skill to do things on their own. But we don't have to be satisfied with just these features here. I'm sure that there are things that you can think of, but this time, I am going to dip my foot into the details. The World of Warcraft could do with more systems that aren't necessary player power, but still add a fresh perspective on how we interact with the game. By now, you should know where I'm going with this, right? I'm talking about traditional player housing. Okay, yeah, I know what you might be thinking. No, just no, right? And that's okay. That's totally okay. You might cringe at the thought of playing house, and no doubt we're gonna get some clever reminders in the comments that
Blizzard has already been there and done with that with the garrison.
Thanks for the revelation, yeah. So you may not care for housing, just as you may not care for collecting pets and mounts and transmog and stuff, but you might like gold. Good. You should keep watching then. Imagine if one day, not in a big BlizzCon announcement, not at the start of a new expansion, but just a patch, some patch, day one of this patch, you're invited to your capital city. A new section of your capital city opened up, a residential district. As a total noob or a veteran of Azeroth's many conflicts, you're presented with a humble home to call your own. You're given a really brief tutorial on how to develop your home, and then you're free to spend the rest of your waking days on it, or to just let it sit there and rot forever. I have to admit, I'm fighting every temptation to gush over how player and guild housing in WoW would work, but once again, let's not get too deep into the details. We're just gonna try to stick to the message. There are certain characteristics needed for housing to be compelling for all players of WoW. It needs to be player-driven, it needs to be optional, and it needs to be given continuous development. First and foremost, it's gotta be powered by the player economy, aka professions. because professions are a hybrid system that fulfill the needs of both player power and prestige, in the fact that professions make a bunch of stuff. Unfortunately, professions need a lot of work. It needs its own video, to be honest, but it needs a lot of work. Notably when it comes to delivering on player power, as well as long-term relevance. But in the context of today's discussion, professions ought to tie directly into housing, somehow, some way. By tying professions to housing, both systems can continue to grow every expansion, but more importantly, it compels gold to be traded between players. Materials across the entire game will suddenly have more use. Players who happen to be gatherers, well, their time no doubt is going to be split in order to meet this sudden surge in demand, and yes, prices will go up because more gold is going to be circulating in the market. On the flip side, you'll also have that much more opportunities to take a piece of the pie. Whatever housing is, or how it works, like I said, it needs to be optional. By that, I mean housing as a system should be a project that you work on, and not a project that you invest in for some sort of return. So it's not a garrison to facilitate player growth or to pick up quests or collect resources. It's an extension of transmogrification, an expression of you as a character and a player. It's endgame. So housing absolutely has to be an account-wide system, just like the other collection systems. An example would be to have a housing collection tab that you complete by gathering materials and profession items, and then feed it into this UI that unlocks housing pieces. These pieces can be used freely across all of your characters on the account. So you're not going to have one house in one location where all your characters are hanging out at, unless you really want to, who knows, but the idea is that you can simply unlock access to everything that you can build account-wide. And lastly, housing needs to be fully supported by the WoW team from the beginning of this feature until the game shuts down. I mean, that's the whole point of an Evergreen system. That means they can be reasonably conservative with what is initially offered at the launch, maybe soft launch of the system. Because it would seem overwhelming to ask for housing variants for every race and outdoor tile set combination right at launch. But as we move from patch to patch, expansion to expansion, the system can incrementally grow with the content and course correct with player feedback. Having a big, resource-draining launch and then forgetting about it, it wouldn't be all that much different from how the garrison was treated. But that's just about all I have to say about all this stuff, so let's wrap things up. Some cool stuff is coming to the world of Warcraft in the coming months, but design approaches like horizontal progression and evergreen systems are more than just cool stuff. They're investments into the long-term health of WoW that preserve the legacy of its past and get us looking forward to the future. The examples that I mentioned are more than likely not the exact answer, but here's the time to share your thoughts in a comment below. Of course, if you enjoyed this listen, please leave a like and subscribe for upcoming Shadowlands coverage and all things Warcraft. We'll see you later. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.